My name is Lucia, and I'm 32 years old. Standing in our living room, I still can't process what just happened. Eric, my partner of 5 years, just told me I have 36 hours to pack up and leave. His new girlfriend Amanda is moving in. The words keep replaying in my head as I stare at the life we built together. 5 years. I gave up my career, moved across the country, and rebuilt my entire life around this man. Now I have 36 hours to erase myself from our home. If you're watching this, let me know where you're from in the comments. Please hit like and subscribe, because trust me, you'll want to see how this story ends. I met Eric at a business seminar in Seattle 5 years ago. It was January, cold and rainy, but the conference room at the Grand Hyatt was warm with anticipation as entrepreneurs and creative professionals networked. I was 32 then, working as a freelance graphic designer passionate about branding and typography. My client list was growing and I was beginning to make a name for myself in Boston's competitive design scene. Eric stood out immediately. Tall, with dark hair and confident blue eyes, he commanded attention when he walked into a room. He was 31 at the time, already making waves in the tech industry with his software company that specialized in financial analytics. When he approached me during the networking hour, I noticed how everyone seemed to gravitate toward him. "That portfolio on your tablet looks interesting," he said, glancing at my work. "Your aesthetic is clean but bold, very memorable." We talked for hours that evening, long after the seminar ended. Eric was charming, asking thoughtful questions about my design philosophy and career ambitions. He told me about growing up in California, his move to Seattle to start his company, and his vision for the future. By the end of the night, he had my number and a promise to meet for dinner the next evening. Our first date was at an upscale restaurant overlooking Elliott Bay. Eric ordered an expensive bottle of wine and spoke passionately about his business. "I believe in building something meaningful," he said, "something that lasts." His intensity was magnetic. When he looked at me, I felt seen in a way I hadn't experienced before. The next morning, a massive bouquet of white roses arrived at my hotel room with a note. "To new beginnings. Dinner tonight." Eric's pursuit was relentless and flattering. Each date was more elaborate than the last. A private boat tour of Lake Washington, tickets to an exclusive gallery opening a helicopter ride over the city. It was intoxicating. When I returned to Boston, Eric called me every day. We spent hours on video calls, and he flew out to visit me twice in the first month. "I can't stop thinking about you," he told me. "I've never connected with anyone like this before." 3 months into our long-distance relationship, Eric surprised me with tickets to Paris. "I want to see the City of Light with you," he said. "I want to watch you experience it." We spent a week wandering through museums, eating at small cafes, and walking along the Seine. On our last night, as we stood beneath the Eiffel Tower, Eric wrapped his arms around me. "I think I'm falling in love with you," he whispered. "I don't want to do long distance anymore. I want to build a life with you." After 6 months of dating, Eric asked me to move to Seattle. "We can create something beautiful together," he promised. "I have this vision of us in a modern house overlooking the water. You'd have a perfect studio space for your design work. We could travel whenever we want." The decision wasn't easy. I had built my client base in Boston, had friends, and a comfortable routine there. My parents lived just an hour away in New Hampshire, but Eric painted such a compelling picture of our future that I found myself saying yes. I turned down a prestigious opportunity with a major design firm in New York. The creative director had been impressed with my portfolio and offered me a senior design position with creative freedom and an impressive salary. When I told Eric about the offer, he frowned. "You'd be giving up your independence," he argued, "working for someone else's vision instead of building your own. Besides, we've talked about Seattle. This is our chance to start our life together." His words made sense to me then. I believed in us in the future we had planned together. So I declined the New York position, packed up my apartment in Boston, said goodbye to my friends and family, and flew to Seattle with 2 suitcases and a heart full of hope. Eric found us a stunning modern house in the Queen Anne neighborhood with panoramic views of Puget Sound. It was more expensive than I was comfortable with, but Eric insisted we deserved it. "This is just the beginning," he said as we moved in. "We're going to build an amazing life here." The first year was blissful. Eric introduced me to his friends, helped me establish connections in Seattle's design community, and encouraged me to take on selective freelance projects. He was generous with gifts, a new MacBook Pro for my birthday, designer clothes. Just because weekend getaways to Vancouver or Portland when he felt we needed a break. We talked about marriage and children. Eric wanted to wait until his company reached certain milestones, but he spoke confidently about our future family. "I can see us with 2 kids," he'd say. "Maybe a boy and a girl. We'll take them traveling, show them the world." I believed every word. I believed in us. I couldn't imagine that 3 years later I'd be standing in our living room being told I had 36 hours to disappear. The first signs of trouble appeared around our second anniversary. Subtle changes that I initially dismissed but grew increasingly difficult to ignore. Looking back, I see the red flags clearly. But at the time, I rationalized each one away. It started with our finances. When we first moved in together, Eric suggested we maintain separate accounts, but create a joint account for household expenses. We both contributed, though his income was significantly higher than mine. But after 2 years, he began questioning my contributions. "I noticed you only put in $1,500 this month for expenses," he commented one evening, looking up from his laptop. "Rent alone is $4,000. "That's what we agreed was fair based on our income ratio," I reminded him. 40% from me, 60 from you. Eric's expression hardened slightly. "Don't you think that should change as the expenses increase? I'm covering most of our lifestyle." This conversation repeated with increasing frequency. Eric began suggesting that I should focus exclusively on freelance work from home rather than pursuing contracts with local agencies. "It would give you more flexibility," he explained. "You could manage your schedule around our needs." What he didn't say, but I later realized, was that it would make me more financially dependent on him. My client base in Seattle wasn't as established as it had been in Boston, and working exclusively from home limited my networking opportunities. Around the same time, Eric started finding reasons for us to cancel plans with my new friends in Seattle. There was always an emergency at work, a last-minute dinner with potential investors, or he was simply too exhausted to socialize. When I suggested going alone, he'd look hurt. "I thought we'd spend the weekend together," he'd say. "I've been so busy at work and I miss you." I'd cancel my plans, feeling guilty for wanting to spend time away from him. Gradually, my social circle shrank to Eric's friends and colleagues, people who saw me primarily as Eric's girlfriend rather than as Lucia. My calls to family became less frequent, too. It wasn't that Eric forbade me from contacting them. He was just always around, listening, occasionally commenting on what he called my mother's interference or my sister's drama. Eventually, I started calling them only when Eric was out of the house. Then came the criticisms of my work. Eric had always been supportive of my design career, but now he began offering constructive feedback that felt increasingly demeaning. "This logo design is a bit basic, don't you think?" he'd say, looking over my shoulder. "I'm just worried that you're not pushing yourself creatively. These projects don't seem challenging enough for someone with your talent." Yet when I mentioned applying for a creative director position at a local agency, Eric immediately discouraged me. "You'd be working 60-hour weeks for people who don't value your vision," he argued. "Besides, I thought we talked about keeping your schedule flexible for when we start a family." We hadn't discussed starting a family anytime soon, but I didn't point that out. Another concerning pattern emerged when Eric insisted that his name alone should be on all major assets. The house was already in his name since he had purchased it before I moved in, but when we bought a new car, he argued that it made sense for him to be the sole owner. "My credit score is higher," he explained. "We'll get a better rate. It's just a practical decision." I agreed, thinking it was logical. But then came the renovation of my home office space. I wanted to contribute to the costs since it was primarily for my use, but Eric insisted on paying for everything. "This adds value to my home," he said, emphasizing the word "my" in a way that made me flinch. "I should cover the investment." His phrasing stung, but I told myself I was being oversensitive. Eric's work hours grew longer. He began attending industry events and networking dinners without me explaining that they were too boring or too technical for me to enjoy. When he returned home late sometimes after midnight, he'd brush off my questions with vague responses about client meetings or team building. I'd wait up for him working on projects or simply sitting in our living room watching the lights of the city and feeling increasingly alone. When he finally came home, he'd be distant, checking his phone constantly and avoiding my gaze. Physical intimacy dwindled. Eric was always too tired, too stressed, or needed to wake up early. When I tried to talk about the change in our relationship, he turned the conversation around on me. "I'm under enormous pressure at work," he'd say. "The company is at a critical growth stage. I need you to be supportive right now, not add to my stress." I'd apologize, feeling selfish for wanting more of his time and attention. I convinced myself that this was just a phase, that things would return to normal once his work settled down. I told myself that all relationships go through rough patches, that what Eric and I had was worth fighting for. But the distance between us continued to grow, and the man who had once pursued me so passionately became increasingly indifferent to my presence in his life. I was living with a stranger who wore my boyfriend's face, and I couldn't understand what had gone wrong or how to fix it. In those lonely nights, I should have recognized that I was being systematically isolated and devalued. Instead, I blamed myself and tried harder to be the perfect partner Eric seemed to want, always supportive, never demanding, grateful for whatever scraps of attention he chose to give me. By our 4th anniversary, the relationship had transformed entirely. Eric was no longer just distant. He had become manipulative and emotionally abusive. The charming, attentive man I fell in love with had vanished, replaced by someone who seemed to take pleasure in undermining my confidence and controlling every aspect of our life together. The gaslighting began subtly. I noticed text messages on Eric's phone from someone named Amanda late one night when he was in the shower. The texts were flirtatious with inside jokes and heart emojis. When I asked him about it, his response was immediate and dismissive. "Amanda. She's just a marketing director we're collaborating with. You're being paranoid, Lucia," he said with an exasperated sigh. "This is exactly why I don't like sharing work details with you. You overanalyze everything." He made me feel crazy for spinning the situation so effectively that I ended up apologizing to him for looking at his phone. This pattern repeated whenever I questioned anything, from unexplained credit card charges to his frequent late nights. He always had an explanation that made me doubt my own perceptions. "You've always been insecure," he'd say, shaking his head sadly. "It's exhausting constantly reassuring you." But he wasn't reassuring me. He was dismissing my concerns and making me question my own judgment. My 32nd birthday arrived during this difficult period. Eric had always made a big deal of my birthdays before. Surprise parties, thoughtful gifts, romantic dinners. This time, the day passed without acknowledgement. When I mentioned it that evening, his response was cold. "You didn't remind me," he said, not looking up from his phone. "You know how busy I am right now. I can't keep track of every date." I was stunned into silence. How could someone forget their partner's birthday after 5 years together? But instead of being angry, I felt guilty for expecting him to remember, for not being understanding enough of his work pressures. The next day, he brought home an expensive bracelet, presenting it without warmth. "Happy belated birthday," he said. "See, I'm not the monster you make me out to be." His gift felt like manipulation rather than affection, but I thanked him profusely, desperate for any sign that he still cared. Around this time, Eric began criticizing my appearance. It started with casual comments about my clothes or hair, then evolved into more direct critiques. "You might want to hit the gym more regularly," he suggested one morning as I dressed for a client meeting. "You've gained weight since we met." I looked at myself in the mirror. Had I changed that much? I'd always been comfortable with my body, but Eric's words planted seeds of doubt. "Maybe you could try a different hairstyle," he'd say. "Something more sophisticated." Or, "That outfit doesn't really flatter you. Don't you have something more presentable?" I began changing my appearance to please him. New clothes, different hairstyle, more makeup, stricter diet. I joined an expensive fitness studio and scheduled my workouts around his preferences. "I don't want you going to those evening classes," he'd say. "That trainer flirts with everyone." My efforts to improve myself never seemed enough. With each change I made, Eric found something new to criticize. I was exhausting myself trying to become someone I wasn't, someone who might finally deserve his approval. At social events with his colleagues, Eric introduced me as his girlfriend, never as his partner or other half, despite our having lived together for 4 years. When people asked how long we'd been together, he'd often say, "A few years," minimizing the significance of our relationship. Whenever I brought up our future, marriage, children, long-term plans, Eric would shut down the conversation. "We're good as we are," he'd say. "Why rush into anything?" It was a stark contrast to his earlier enthusiasm about our future family. Eric's control extended to our home environment. When I suggested repainting the living room, he dismissed my color choice. "This is an expensive house," he said. "We need to maintain its value with neutral colors." When I bought new throw pillows for the couch, he removed them, saying they cluttered the space. I stopped making suggestions or changes, accepting that it was really his house, not ours. I began to feel like a guest in my own home, careful not to leave traces of myself in the common areas. The most alarming red flag was Eric's phone behavior. He became obsessive about it, never leaving it unattended. He changed his password frequently and positioned himself so I couldn't see his screen. Sometimes I'd notice him quickly switching apps when I entered the room. One night I woke at 3 a.m. to find Eric's side of the bed empty. I went downstairs and saw him on the patio, speaking intently on his phone, gesturing with his free hand. When he noticed me watching, he immediately ended the call. "Work crisis," he explained tersely. "Go back to bed." But no work crisis would require such secrecy, such hushed tones in the middle of the night. I knew something was wrong, but I had become so isolated, so dependent on Eric financially and emotionally, that confronting the truth seemed impossible. I had no close friends left in Seattle. My family was across the country. My career had stagnated due to the limitations Eric had placed on my professional growth. I was trapped in a relationship that was slowly destroying my sense of self, yet I couldn't imagine how to escape it. Little did I know that the situation was about to reach its breaking point in the most painful way possible. The day I discovered the truth began like any other. Eric had left early for work, barely saying goodbye. I was working on a branding project in my home office when I realized I needed some files from our shared cloud storage account. When I logged in, I noticed a folder I hadn't seen before titled simply A. Curiosity got the better of me, and I clicked on it. Inside were hundreds of photos of Eric with a woman I didn't recognize. They were at restaurants, on hikes, at what looked like work events, and in more intimate settings. In many photos, they were embracing or kissing. The timestamps showed these photos spanned the past 8 months. My hands shook as I opened another folder containing email exchanges between Eric and someone named Amanda Reynolds, the same Amanda from the text messages months ago. The emails were explicit, romantic, and devastating. "Can't wait to wake up next to you every morning," Eric had written. "Once I sort out my living situation, we'll make it happen." My living situation. That's what I had become. In another email dated just 3 weeks earlier, Eric wrote, "I've never felt this way about anyone, Amanda. You understand me in ways no one else has. You support my ambitions without making demands. You're my perfect match in every way." The words cut through me like a knife. These were the same things he had once said to me. There were detailed discussions about their future together, weekend getaways they had taken, while I thought Eric was on business trips, and plans for Amanda to move in with him, with us, into the home I had helped create. In their exchanges, Eric portrayed himself as essentially single, referring to me as his roommate, or an ex who still lives in my house because she has nowhere else to go. He complained about me to her, describing me as clingy, professionally stagnant, and unwilling to move on with her life. I sat there for hours reading through years of deception. The truth hit me in waves. Eric had been systematically preparing to replace me. All while I'd been trying desperately to save our relationship, he'd been building a new one with someone else. I was still sitting at my desk, numb with shock, when Eric returned home unexpectedly in the middle of the afternoon. He stopped short when he saw my face. "What's wrong?" he asked, but his eyes darted to my computer screen and his expression changed from concern to anger in an instant. "You're snooping through my private files. What the hell, Lucia?" His immediate defensiveness only confirmed everything. No denial, no explanation, just anger that I had discovered his betrayal. "Who is Amanda Reynolds?" I asked, my voice surprisingly steady despite the chaos inside me. "And why have you been telling her you're single?" Eric's face hardened. He set down his bag and crossed his arms. "I see no point in lying anymore. Yes, I've been seeing Amanda. She's the director of marketing at Tech Fusion. We met at a conference 8 months ago." 8 months, I repeated. "You've been lying to me for 8 months." "It wasn't planned." Eric said, his tone eerily calm. "But we connected immediately. She understands my vision, Lucia. She supports my ambitions without trying to change me." "When have I ever tried to change you?" I asked, bewildered. "Your expectations, your need for attention, your subtle disappointment when I work late." He listed as if these were unreasonable demands, rather than basic relationship expectations. "Amanda embraces my drive. She's building her own career in the same industry. We align perfectly." I felt like I was talking to a stranger. "So all those late nights, the business trips?" "Not all of them," he said, not even having the decency to look guilty. "But yes, some were with Amanda." "And you've been planning for her to move in here into our home." Eric sighed, as if my questions were tiresome. "Look, I didn't want it to happen this way. I was going to talk to you this weekend. Amanda's lease ends this month, and it makes sense for her to move in here. While I'm still living here." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "That's what I need to discuss with you," Eric said, checking his watch, as if this conversation about destroying my life was cutting into his schedule. "I think it's time for you to find your own place. You've been dependent on me for too long, Lucia. This isn't healthy for either of us." "Dependent on you." The unfairness of his characterization stunned me. "I moved across the country for you. I turned down career opportunities for you. I've contributed to this household financially and in every other way. And I've given you a place to live, introduced you to my connections, supported your freelance work," Eric countered. "But it's been 5 years, and what have you accomplished? Where is your career going? You've stagnated, Lucia, and you're holding me back." Each word was a slap. I realized that he had constructed a narrative where I was the problem, where his betrayal was somehow justified by my supposed failings. "How long do I have?" I asked, feeling hollow. Eric checked his watch again. "Amanda's moving in on Friday, so you have about 36 hours to pack your things and find somewhere else to stay. I think that's generous." 36 hours? I couldn't process what he was saying. "After 5 years together, you're giving me 36 hours to pack up my life." "I've already been more than fair," Eric said coldly. "Legally, this is my house. Your name isn't on anything. I could ask you to leave immediately." The calculated cruelty of it all finally broke through my shock. "You've been planning this for months," I realized aloud. "Keeping me dependent on you, isolating me, making sure your name was on everything." For a moment, something like guilt flashed across Eric's face, but it quickly vanished. "You should be grateful I'm giving you time to pack properly," he said. "And I won't contest any of your personal belongings. Take whatever you brought into the relationship." As if 5 years of my life could be so neatly categorized and packed away. "Amanda will be here tomorrow evening to start bringing some of her things," Eric added, turning to leave. "I'd appreciate it if you could be civil. This doesn't need to be dramatic." With that, he walked out, leaving me alone with the knowledge that I had 36 hours to dismantle the life I had spent 5 years building. 36 hours before another woman would replace me in my own home. The next 36 hours were a blur of pain, rage, and desperate activity. After Eric left the room, I sat frozen for nearly an hour trying to process the unthinkable. My entire life had just shattered, and I had been given less than 2 days to pick up the pieces. When I finally moved, it was with a strange detached efficiency. I began by calling the only person in Seattle I still trusted, Maria, a former client who had become something of a friend before Eric subtly discouraged the relationship. She answered on the third ring, her voice warm with surprise. "Lucia, it's been months. How are you?" The simple kindness in her voice broke something in me, and I found myself explaining between sobs what had just happened. Without hesitation, Maria offered her guest room for as long as you need it. Her immediate support was the first lifeline in what felt like an endless sea of betrayal. With temporary housing secured, I turned to the overwhelming task of deciding what to take and what to leave behind. 5 years of life together had blurred the lines between mine and ours. The furniture was mostly Eric's, but I had chosen much of it. The kitchen was filled with appliances we had purchased together. The artwork on the walls, the books on the shelves, the plants in every room, all represented our shared life. Eric continued his routine as if nothing had changed. He went to work the next morning reminding me on his way out that Amanda will be here around 7 tonight, and suggesting I try to be finished with the common areas by then. His callousness was breathtaking. Left alone, I moved methodically through the house. Clothes into suitcases, personal items into boxes. Each object a decision, essential or expendable. What did I need to survive? What could I bear to leave behind? In my home office, I gathered my professional equipment, portfolio materials, and client files. This space had always been most fully mine, and packing it felt like preserving a core piece of my identity that Eric hadn't managed to diminish. While sorting through our financial documents, I made a critical discovery. Despite Eric's insistence that I had contributed nothing meaningful to our assets, I found records of substantial payments I had made toward home improvements, our joint investment account, and even the mortgage. Payments Eric had assured me were going into a relationship expense account, but had actually been applied directly to his assets. I carefully photographed these documents along with bank statements showing transfers from my account to his over the years. A small voice in my head, not quite smothered by years of emotional manipulation, whispered that these might be important later. I also discovered that Eric had recently transferred a large sum from our joint account, money that included my earnings, to his private account. The transaction had occurred just 1 week earlier, around the time he must have finalized plans for Amanda to move in. He had been preparing financially as well as emotionally for my removal. As the hours ticked by, I worked through my grief by focusing on immediate tasks. Box by box, I dismantled the life I had believed in. By late afternoon, I had filled Maria's car. She had insisted on helping with my essential belongings and arranged for a storage unit for the rest. At 6:30, as I was making a final sweep of the bedroom, I heard voices downstairs. Eric had returned, with Amanda. They were earlier than expected, laughing as they entered the house. I froze, not ready for this confrontation. "The living room gets amazing natural light," Eric was saying. "I'm thinking your mid-century pieces will look perfect by the windows." "It's even more beautiful than the photos," a woman's voice, Amanda's voice, responded. "I can't believe I get to live here." Their conversation stopped abruptly when I appeared at the top of the stairs. Amanda looked up startled. She was younger than me, perhaps 28, with sleek dark hair and an elegant professional outfit. Exactly the type of ambitious, polished woman Eric had been molding me to become. "Oh," she said, glancing uncertainly between Eric and me. "I didn't realize." "Amanda, this is Lucia," Eric said smoothly, though I caught the tension in his jaw. "She's just finishing up packing." Amanda's expression shifted from confusion to shock. "Lucia, your roommate? Ex-girlfriend," Eric corrected, avoiding my gaze. "We've been separating for a while now." 5 years, I said quietly, descending the stairs. "We've been together for 5 years, not roommates. I'm not sure what Eric has told you about me." Amanda's face paled. 5 years. But you said— She turned to Eric, who was now visibly uncomfortable. It's complicated, he began, but Amanda cut him off. You told me she was a short-term roommate who needed to move out. You said you'd been single for over a year. Her voice rose with each word. Have you been lying to me this entire time? The realization that Amanda was also a victim of Eric's manipulation stirred something unexpected in me. Compassion. Despite everything, I didn't want to cause a scene or hurt her further. She was about to learn who Eric really was, without any help from me. I'll be out within the hour, I said simply. Good luck with everything. I returned upstairs to finish packing, leaving them to what sounded like the beginning of an intense argument. Part of me wanted to stay and witness Eric's carefully constructed lies crumble, but a stronger part recognized that my energy was better spent rebuilding my own life. When I carried my last box downstairs 30 minutes later, the house was quiet. Eric was alone in the kitchen, staring at his phone with a tense expression. Amanda left, he said flatly, not looking up. Thanks for that dramatic scene. I only told her the truth, I replied. Something you should have done months ago. Eric finally met my eyes, and I saw anger there, but also something else. Fear. For perhaps the first time, something wasn't going according to his meticulous plan. She'll calm down, he said, more to himself than to me. She just needs time to process. I could have said more, could have unleashed 5 years of accumulated hurt and rage. But looking at Eric, this man I had loved who had systematically dismantled my self-worth while building a relationship with someone else, I felt a strange sense of clarity. Goodbye, Eric, I said, simply picking up my box and walking toward the door. Lucia, he called after me, his voice softer now. I never meant to hurt you. It just happened this way. I paused at the door but didn't turn around. No, Eric. You planned this. Every step. With those words, I walked out of the house and closed the door behind me, leaving in silence but carrying with me evidence, determination, and the first sparks of a plan that would eventually become Eric's worst nightmare. The weeks following my abrupt departure from Eric's life were simultaneously the most challenging and most empowering of my adult life. I moved into Maria's guest room with the few possessions I had managed to take with me, feeling stripped down to my very essence. But within that vulnerability, I found an unexpected strength. My first priority was establishing financial independence. The day after leaving, I opened a new bank account at a different institution and transferred my remaining funds from our joint account. It wasn't much. Eric had already moved most of the money, but it was a start. 3 days after moving out, I contacted Patricia Winters, a lawyer specializing in cohabitation and property disputes. I found her through a women's legal aid organization that Maria had connected me with. Our first meeting was eye-opening. What you're describing is a pattern we see often, Patricia explained, reviewing the financial documents I had brought. Unmarried couples living together for years, combining resources with one partner, gradually consolidating control of joint assets. Do I have any legal recourse? I asked. My name isn't on the house or most of our other assets. Washington State recognizes what's called committed intimate relationships in property disputes, Patricia explained. Given your 5-year cohabitation and these financial contributions, you may have a strong claim to a portion of the assets acquired or enhanced during your relationship. For the first time since Eric's betrayal, I felt a glimmer of hope. What do we need to do? Document everything, Patricia advised. Your financial contributions, improvements to the property, career sacrifices you made for the relationship. We'll build a case showing that you operated as a committed partnership regardless of marital status. I threw myself into this task with renewed purpose, gathering bank statements, emails, text messages, photographs, anything that proved the nature of our relationship and my contributions to our shared life. The process was painful, forcing me to revisit years of memories but also illuminating. I began to see clearly how Eric had manipulated situations to his advantage, how he had encouraged my financial dependence while minimizing my contributions. Parallel to my legal preparations, I focused on rebuilding my career. I reached out to former clients from Boston and reconnected with industry contacts in Seattle. Maria introduced me to the creative director at her company, who was looking for a senior designer for a 6-month project. "Your portfolio is impressive," he said during our interview. "Why haven't you been more active in the Seattle design community?" The question forced me to confront how much I had allowed my professional identity to be diminished during my relationship with Eric. "Personal circumstances," I answered honestly, "but I'm ready to change that." I got the job, which provided both income stability and a chance to rebuild my professional network. Each day in the creative agency's collaborative environment reminded me of the ambitious designer I had been before Eric, the one who had been offered a senior position in New York. While rebuilding my professional life, I also began reconnecting with friends and family. My first call was to my sister in Boston. "Lucia," her voice was cautious, "it's been months since we've really talked." Through tears, I explained everything: the breakup, the betrayal, the 36-hour eviction. Her response was immediate and fierce. "I'm booking a flight to Seattle right now. You shouldn't be going through this alone." My sister stayed with me for a week, helping me find a small apartment I could afford on my new salary and accompanying me to meetings with Patricia. Her unwavering support helped me recognize how isolated I had become under Eric's influence. "He never liked me," she observed one evening. "Now I understand why. I asked too many questions." With my sister's encouragement, I also called my parents and close friends from Boston. Each conversation was difficult, but healing, rebuilding connections that had frayed during my years with Eric. Many expressed that they had been concerned about my withdrawal, but hadn't known how to reach me. About a month after moving out, I received an unexpected text from Amanda. "Can we meet for coffee? There are things I think we both should know." We met at a quiet cafe far from Eric's neighborhood. Amanda looked tired, her professional polish somewhat diminished. "I broke things off with Eric," she said immediately. "The night I met you, after you left, we had a huge fight. He tried to explain away the lies, said you were clingy and delusional about the nature of your relationship. But something didn't add up." She took a deep breath. "So I started asking around, talking to people who've known Eric longer than I have, and I found out about Jennifer." "Jennifer?" The name meant nothing to me. "His girlfriend before you," Amanda explained. "They lived together for 3 years in San Francisco before he moved to Seattle. The pattern was identical. He gradually isolated her, controlled their finances, then suddenly ended things when he met you." The revelation sent chills through me. Eric's behavior wasn't just selfish opportunism. It was a calculated pattern he had executed before. "There were others too," Amanda continued. "Brief relationships with similar dynamics. Eric has a type: talented, independent women he can gradually control and discard." She pushed a folder across the table. "I've collected statements from Jennifer and 2 others. I thought you might need them." Looking at Amanda, I felt an unexpected sense of solidarity. "Why are you helping me?" She smiled grimly. "Because what he does is predatory, and it shouldn't go unchallenged, and because I almost fell for it too." This meeting proved pivotal in my legal case. Jennifer's statement detailed how Eric had convinced her to invest in property improvements and then left her with nothing when he moved to Seattle for career opportunities, which I now realized had included pursuing me. Working with Patricia and armed with this new evidence, we prepared a comprehensive legal claim. 3 months after being forced out of my home, we filed for equitable distribution of property and financial compensation based on Washington's committed intimate relationship doctrine. Eric's response was swift and aggressive. His lawyer sent threatening letters dismissing my claims as delusional and financially motivated. He offered a small settlement out of generosity, but demanded a non-disclosure agreement in return. "He's worried," Patricia observed. "The settlement offer means he recognizes you have a case." We declined the offer and proceeded with our claim. The legal process was grueling, with depositions where Eric portrayed me as a parasitic girlfriend who had contributed nothing of value to our life together. His lawyer questioned every financial contribution I had documented, suggesting I had been essentially a tenant in Eric's home. But we had prepared thoroughly. Bank records showed my consistent financial contributions. Emails and text messages demonstrated the nature of our relationship and joint decision-making. Statements from contractors confirmed my involvement in home renovation decisions, and testimony from Eric's previous girlfriends established a pattern of financial exploitation. The turning point came during a mediation session 6 months after our breakup. Eric had arrived confident, dismissive of my claims. But as my lawyer methodically presented our evidence, including the pattern of similar behavior with previous partners, his composure cracked. "This is character assassination," he protested. "My past relationships have no bearing on this case." "They establish a pattern of intent," Patricia countered calmly, "one that significantly undermines your characterization of your relationship with Ms. Lucia." By the end of that session, Eric's lawyer was suggesting a revised settlement. 2 weeks later, we reached an agreement. Eric would pay me a substantial sum representing my contributions to the home investments and compensation for career opportunities I had foregone for the relationship. The amount was life-changing, enough to secure my financial independence and reinvest in my design career. Just as importantly, the agreement contained no non-disclosure requirement. Eric had desperately wanted my silence, but I refused to be muzzled. My story, and the stories of Jennifer and the others, deserved to be heard. As I signed the final settlement papers, I thought about the woman who had left Eric's house in silence 7 months earlier. She had been broken, humiliated, given 36 hours to disappear. But in fighting back and refusing to accept Eric's narrative, she had found her voice and her power again. And that more than any financial settlement was the true victory. 1 year after Eric gave me 36 hours to leave our home, I stand in my own space, a bright, airy loft in Seattle's Capitol Hill neighborhood that I purchased with part of the settlement money. The walls are adorned with my designs and artwork collected on my own travels. Every element reflects my aesthetic, my choices, my life rebuilt on my own terms. The healing process hasn't been linear or easy. In the immediate aftermath of the settlement, I experienced a rush of vindication and relief, but these positive emotions were often interrupted by waves of grief and anger. How could I have given 5 years of my life to someone who had been systematically preparing to discard me? How had I missed so many warning signs? "Be gentle with yourself," my therapist advised during our weekly sessions. "Emotional manipulation happens gradually. The most insidious abuse is the kind that makes you doubt your own perceptions." Therapy became a crucial part of my recovery. Through it, I learned to identify the patterns of manipulation that had characterized my relationship with Eric, to recognize how he had strategically isolated me and undermined my confidence. Most importantly, I learned that his behavior reflected his pathology, not my worth. "People like Eric target strong, capable partners," my therapist explained. "Your independence and talent were what attracted him initially. The problem was never your inadequacy. It was that he needed to diminish your light to maintain control." This perspective helped me address the shame I had carried, the belief that I had somehow failed by not recognizing what was happening sooner. I began to see that my trust hadn't been a weakness, but a strength that Eric had exploited. Professionally, the year brought tremendous growth. With my confidence rebuilding and finances secure, I launched my own design studio specializing in branding for women-owned businesses. The concept was born from conversations with other women who had rebuilt their lives after setbacks. Women like Jennifer, Eric's previous girlfriend, who had become a friend and occasionally collaborated with me on projects. There's something powerful about creating visual identities for women in transition. I explained to a design blog that featured my studio. I understand the process of reclaiming and redefining yourself. My client base grew steadily, and 6 months ago I hired 2 junior designers to help manage the workload. My studio now occupies a small but beautiful space in a historic building downtown, a tangible symbol of my professional rebirth. Personally, healing has been more complex but equally rewarding. I've rebuilt relationships with family and friends, becoming close again with my sister and parents in ways I hadn't been for years. I've also formed new friendships and Seattle connections based on mutual respect, rather than the conditional acceptance I experienced with Eric's social circle. Dating again has been challenging. The first few times I had coffee with potentially interested men, I found myself hypervigilant, analyzing their every word for signs of manipulation or control. But gradually, with patience and self-awareness, I've learned to trust my instincts again, to recognize the difference between normal relationship dynamics and warning signs of emotional abuse. 3 months ago, I met Daniel, a literature professor, who approached relationships with refreshing honesty and respect for boundaries. Our connection is developing slowly, thoughtfully, without the whirlwind intensity that characterized my early days with Eric. I've learned that genuine love grows in the space of mutual freedom, not possession. Perhaps the most unexpected development in my healing journey has been the community that formed in the aftermath of my legal battle with Eric. About 2 months after our settlement, I received a message from a woman named Sophia. "I dated Eric briefly last year," she wrote. "Amanda found me and shared your story. I experienced the same early love bombing followed by subtle control. Thankfully, I recognized the pattern before becoming too invested, but it was still damaging. Thank you for standing up to him." Sophia was the first of several women who reached out, each with similar stories about Eric or men like him. Recognizing the need for support among survivors of emotional and financial abuse, I helped organize a monthly meeting group. What began as 4 women sharing experiences over coffee has grown to a network of over 30 members who provide each other with emotional support, legal resources, and professional connections. Last month, we launched a website with resources for identifying and escaping financially abusive relationships, including warning signs, legal options in different states, and success stories of women who rebuilt their lives. The project has been healing not just for me, but for everyone involved. I occasionally hear updates about Eric through mutual acquaintances. His company struggled after our legal battle became known in Seattle's close-knit tech community. Several investors withdrew, concerned about the ethical implications. He eventually relocated to Austin, presumably to restart where his reputation hadn't preceded him. I feel no satisfaction in his difficulties, only hope that he might someday recognize the pattern of harm he creates. As for Amanda, we maintain casual contact. She's thriving in her marketing career and recently became engaged to someone she describes as transparent to a fault. Her experience with Eric, though brief, made her a fierce advocate for relationship equality and financial partnership. Looking back on the woman I was when Eric gave me 36 hours to leave, I barely recognize her. Not because she was weak, she wasn't, but because she had temporarily lost sight of her own worth, her own power. The journey from that moment to now has been about reclaiming not just financial equity, but personal sovereignty. If there's a lesson in my experience, it's that silence serves abusers while speaking truth dismantles their power. By walking away quietly that day, I gave Eric the impression that I would disappear from his life without consequence. He never imagined that I would find my voice, gather evidence, connect with other survivors, and hold him accountable for years of manipulation and exploitation. The most profound healing has come from turning my personal pain into collective empowerment. Every time our support group welcomes a new member, every time our website receives a message saying, "This helped me recognize what was happening to me," I feel the transformation of my worst nightmare into something meaningful and important. Life will always contain disappointments and betrayals. That's part of the human experience. But it also contains resilience, growth, and the capacity to build something beautiful from broken pieces. My 36 hours of crisis became the foundation for a life more authentic and purposeful than I could have imagined. If you're watching this and recognizing your own relationship in my story, please know that you're not alone. The path to rebuilding isn't easy, but it leads to a place where you own your worth, your choices, and your future. Have you ever had to rebuild your life after a significant loss or betrayal? Share your experience in the comments below. And if you found value in my story, please subscribe to this channel and share this video with someone who might need to hear it. Together we can transform our individual nightmares into collective strength. Thank you for listening.